Good afternoon, students of Principles of Advanced Nursing Practice, and welcome to the second lecture in the series of 4 in the first semester. Our contact detail is on the slide, as usual, and then we would just like to quickly discuss with you what the agenda is for today. So for today, we're going to revise Unit 1, which is slides 1 to 6. Then we're going to discuss assignment questions, and I've got 2 Belgium students here that is going to help me do that. They're going to deal with slides 8 to 18. Kate is going to deal with professionalism and professional criteria, which is question 2 and unit 1.2, and Margot is going to deal with the role functions of the nurse, which is question 3, unit 4.1. And then I'm going to deal with slides 19 to 30, which will then help you to answer question 4, which is contained in unit 3.1, as well as question 5, which is in unit 2.5. And then the last slide will be general information, and then we will allow some queries from students if there are any. So welcome here, and let's just go to the next slide then, dealing with the revision. So our first broadcast last week, we discussed question 1 and question 6 mostly, and we made a difference between, or we looked at the differences between personal philosophies of people and then also the philosophy of the career field like nursing and the philosophy of the workplace, and we identified how these philosophies could clash in the workplace to then cause moral dilemmas and make it very unpleasant to come to work, because you can't seem to get them to get you to a position where you can deal fairly with a patient and in a way that you feel as your conscience can deal with the situation. Then the second aspect that we dealt with was the highlights of a philosophy. We didn't really discuss that much, but we did say that it has to be included in the answer of the first question. So just to highlight to you what those highlights are, it is nursing being a caring profession, nursing being a way of life, and then nursing being the therapeutic use of the self. And then the last one, which is actually quoted the first in the guide, is nurses having the freedom of choice, especially in the sense whether they want to abide to these rules as a caring profession, being a way of life, and the therapeutic use of the self. And if they find that this is too much for them, they cannot be that person that nursing is expected of them to be, then they have the freedom of choice to leave the profession. But they also have the freedom of choice to choose what speciality they like, and so forth. So that's Unit 1 then, and question 1 just revised. Then we also spoke about the 4 theories. We were dealing with 2 non-nursing theories, which were quantum and Ubuntu, which was explained to you. And the material, there's more material on Sunlearn and in the guide about that. And the 2 nursing theories, Leininger's cultural care theory and Nightingale's theory dealing with the nursing paradigm, is also being put on Sunlearn for you as reading material. And especially the honors students need to focus on this question, because that's question 6 that deals with the 4 theories. You need to analyze and synthesize it. Then we also discussed the paradigm of nursing, and that nursing theories especially deals with that. It explains this paradigm. It explains how nursing as a science is, what it is, and then also how does nursing as a science explain what a patient, a person, a health and environment is. And for that, Solander's on Sunlearn is a very good explanation of the whole paradigm of nursing. And then we also had a slide or 2 about professionalism, and I told you about the Gallup poll that is done yearly in America, which determines which career, which profession is the most trusted by the Americans. And year on year, nursing as a career field is the one most trusted. So you just need to go catch up on your first broadcast, which is available already. I have also downloaded this broadcast on the administrators next to Florence Kleinhaan's computer, so you can contact any of Florence Kleinhaan's or Miranda Castle or Miranda Hall, which will then help you gain this so that you have it and can listen to it again. One of my friends that used to work in Saudi Arabia said that the way to success for her was to play these recordings all the time and to check which slides was mentioned, and that is the way that she did very well in this module. So the question then again was, with the last broadcast, was where are you and your service on the continuum between Sari Gamp, which was the character from Charles Dickens in the 1800s, which was a very slovenly nurse. You can see her with a glass of wine and dirty and so on, and Florence Nightingale that was born in the same century and that reformed nursing. So we need you to find yourself on that continuum and then work towards being Florence Nightingale or better, if not there already. So the next issue that I want to address is I want to just quickly explain what the connection is between a theory, vision and mission, and then in the second semester those of you that's doing PANP 741 will also then be explained what theory, vision and mission has to do with policies and procedures. So a nursing theory theorizes about the nursing paradigm that we have just mentioned. The nursing, what is a person, what is health and what is environment. Whereas a vision and a mission statement forms the basis for unit and organizational plans to deal with the nursing paradigm. So a vision is also a statement about where you ideally want to see yourself or your organization in the future and towards which you are striving. Like, for instance, an example is the vision of this unit is to become renowned for the quality of our service, our nursing service to our patients. Then a mission is a brief statement identifying the reason for an organization's existence, which also clarifies the vision by specifying activities, and this comes out of Jooster's handbook. So the mission of the unit could be to provide quality nursing services and facilities for the community, to promote wellness, to relieve suffering and restore health as swiftly, safely and humanely as possible, consistent with the best services that we can give at the highest value for all concerned. So you can now see the nursing paradigm presenting in the vision, talking about the service and our patients, and you can also see the nursing paradigm presenting in the mission, the nursing services, looking at wellness, relieving suffering and restoring health. And then policies and procedures in the second semester follows from the vision and the mission statement, and they will then also follow through on what the vision and mission statements say. So you can see how theory goes through as a golden thread. So the theory that you believe in will then see you applying that nursing into your policies and procedures. That brings me back to professionalism then in Unit 1.2, and I just wanted, before I hand it over to Kat, explain professionalism again then from this unit's perspective. Professionalism implies that the practitioner fulfills all the norms and expectations of the person's profession. That means that the codes of conduct, the rules, the principles of behavior as determined by the profession. And we must remember that maturity affects the level of professionalism. So obviously you will not get the same grade of maturity amongst first-year nursing students than you would amongst a person that has been a professional all her life and maybe is a CEO of the hospital or a unit manager, because they're supposed to be the role models. So just to also touch on that point, there was a newspaper article in February in the news about nursing students at one of our nursing colleges in Cape Town that was having a sort of a strike action. They were very unhappy about the treatment in the nursing college residents and also how the university dealt with it. And then they went out and they banned management from the campus, and they threw the cars going by they threw out their desks, they threw the cars with stones, and it was very disruptive. So that shows their level of maturity in the profession, which is not much yet. But then the maturity of the lecturers would then reflect a more professional attitude. So attributes of professionalism then are accountability, being competent, having the skills, knowledge, and values and attitudes, having leadership skills and abilities, being able to self-regulate yourself, meaning that you come on time for duty, you're not late all the time. Commitment to excellence. You're trying to get your unit to be the best unit possible. To social values. So you also portray the values of your community. You are service-directed, and you have duty, honor, and integrity and respect for others. So CART is going to look at the criteria of a profession from what is said in the guide, and she will also then compare what is happening in Belleville, and also then, Belgium, sorry, I've got Belleville on my brain. And then also she's going to try and connect it to the case for you, to give you a bit of an example on how to deal with answering this question, because you have to continuously refer back to the case scenario. Okay?
Thank you. So hello everybody. I will tell you a bit more about question 2. So this is question 2, the criteria of a profession and professionalism to be considered when dealing with such a patient. So I will tell you a bit more about my interpretation and how I would handle this situation. I also based my answers on subunit 1.2, the fundamentals of professional practice. So an important start of professionalism are the values. So as you can see on the PowerPoint, we have 3 important values, the clinical competence, humanism, and altruism. So humanism is the concern for and interest in humanity, like empathy, understanding the person's perspective, good communication, and making clear that you understand the patient. And then next we have altruism. Altruism is placing the needs of the patient above your own personal needs. So in general, this means that you as a nurse will display an appropriate level of sensitive communication with professional boundaries to maintain a therapeutic relationship with the patient. So if we apply this to the case with such a member of the public, it means that the nurse has to be objective. You always have to be objective with your patient and keep a good communication always in mind, because a good communication is going to be the basis of your care. You have to make clear to the patient that you are trying to understand him, that you want to do your best in understanding why he has such a behavior, and that you will explain to him that you want to try and understand him, so that he can so it's clear to them that you're interested in their situation. So next, we have professional behavior. So this means that professional behavior can only be learned by socialization with other professionals. So this means in the case that your colleagues are the most important resource. You can go to your colleagues and talk to your colleagues about the situation and how they would handle the situation. So they can provide you really important tips that you can use in the future when you're dealing with such a member of the public in the future. So they're a really important resource. Third, we also have some criteria of a profession. So I only described three criteria, but it's important for you as a student that you will have to learn all the criteria. But I thought that the criteria on the PowerPoint, on the slides, are the most important for this case. So the first criteria is that the nurse is obligated to do their best endeavors in meeting the needs of the patient. Also, their service model is always based on the needs of the client, even when the client doesn't have the ability to pay for the service. So the priority is always the well-being of the client. And then third is a critical analyzing of your activities. So as a nurse, it's always important to think critical about your activities and about how you handle your activities, because this can be an important resource for the future. So also, if we apply this to the case, this means that the patient and his needs are always a priority, even if you have a bad experience or a bad past with some aggressive or violent patients. And also you have to make, just as I said, always a critical analysis of your activities. So you can go to your colleagues and talk about your activity and how the situation was, and you can ask for tips and how they would handle this situation, for in the future. Also very interesting to keep in mind are the ethical considerations. So the ethical considerations in South Africa, you can find them in the Code of Ethics of the Nursing Profession, so the SANC. It declares that the nurse will always provide care to the best of their ability. Also, we have the Declaration of Helsinki. So the Declaration of Helsinki determines that professional practitioners need to adhere to the principles of autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice when dealing with human beings. So I thought the two most important for this case were non-maleficence and justice. So non-maleficence means that a nurse can do no harm to any human being or healthcare users. It includes the rule not to kill, not to cause pain or suffering, not to incapacitate others, and not to cause offense to others, and not to deprive others of the goods of life. And then also justice is very important as a nurse. So you have to be just, equal, fair, and so you also have to pursue the justice and advocate on behalf of vulnerable and disadvantaged healthcare users. Last but not least, I also found a very important article. I thought it was very interesting to use for this case. So the article is called "The Strategies Used by Clinical Nurse Specialists in Difficult Clinician-Patient Situations." It's an article by Wolf. So this article describes that a dedicated education for the nurse can help the nurse to be aware of their own personal biases and negative attitudes, because when you have a negative attitude as a patient, as a nurse, you will isolate or stigmatize or label the patient in not a good way, and this will affect the patient safety, the staff safety, and of course the quality of care. So when we apply this to the case, this means that if you start with a bad attitude against the patient, they will not receive any appropriate care. So you will label or stigmatize the patient, what will cause bad and unfair care. So you have to prevent this and be aware of your own biases and negative attitudes. So just as a reminder, here's the article. So if, I think you can see it on Sunlearn. Cornell will put it on. So, okay, now I will go to Margot.
Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, I will discuss question 3, the role function of the nurse to be considered when dealing with such a patient. In the 4 years as a preparation for the role that the nurse practitioner will fulfill in society, once qualified, certain specific knowledge, skills and attitudes and learned and made part of the individual knowledge and value system and skill set. It is these values that individual knowledge and values, it is these values that the regulatory body wishes to nurture and develop so that the nurse practitioner would develop into a responsible and accountable member of society and of the nursing fraternity. When fulfilling a professional role with a specific role status, a certain function have to be carried out. In nursing, this function have been counted as the dependent, interdependent, and independent function. How a nurse fulfills this function will have an effect on the reputations of the nurses and the profession earned in their communities and country. A good reputation is earned by the diligent application of the role function by every single nurse. Then, the role functions arise from role status and rest on the basis of personal accountability for every action, whether it's dependent, independent, or dependent function. The dependent function is the function includes to obey the law that authorizes the nurse's practice. A nurse has to be registered under the Nursing Act 33 of 2005. And she becomes criminally liable if she does not observe this act, as well as other health-related acts and the law of the country. In Belgium, too, you can only perform the nurse function if you have a visa and are registered at a federal public health service. A second one, we have the independent function. A nurse can be disciplined for her misdemeanors. She has professional status, rights, and duties. These functions have 4 aspects. The prescriptive, organizational, and implementation function of the nursing process involving assessment, diagnosis, treatment, and care. A second, carrying out her duties as a registered nurse in the appropriate manner. She's totally responsible and accountable for her actions and needs to be competent, registered, and have integrity to carry out her function with accuracy and skill. A third one, she's the only one that can decide whether she has the knowledge and competence and whether her actions are legal and ethical. And as fourth one, she has the duty to act responsibly within the parameters of her scope of practice and the legal and ethical constraints at her own level of competence. It is also important in Belgium that if you are delegated to the doctor's duty, and it's not your authority, that you have to check with the doctor and register everything, so that you protect yourself if mistakes occur. If patients later complain about mistakes, that you as a nurse can prove that it was not your fault. Also in Belgium, we have the law of KB 78. This law indicates which actions the nurse may or may not do. We have the B1 and the B2 actions. These are technical activities. And for the B1 action, the nurse can do her activities without the prescription of the doctors. But the B2 actions, they can only be done if you have a prescription of the doctor. Then you have also the C actions. These are actions that are actually performed by the doctor, but the doctor delegates it to you as a graduate nurse. Last but not least, we have the interdependent function. These nurses require certain actions from other healthcare practitioners, give due recognition for the function, secures them for her patients. Healthcare is a cooperative activity. The doctor and the nurse has a reciprocal responsibility for the patients. They are colleagues, and she's not subservient to the doctor. Therefore, if you do not feel safe with a violent patient, or you do not know how to deal with the situation, it's important that you form a close-knit team, a team where you can count on each other and ask for advice if you want. Now I will give the word.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting, your take on it. I do like it very much. I do like how Kat brought the scenario in, so I want the students to do that too. You must just remember that Kat focused on the criteria of a profession, which was very much related to this case for her, and she was quite correct. But I want the students, for extra points, then to make sure that they mention all the criteria of a profession. I also like how Margot explained how things agree or is similar in Belgium. So they also seem to have a dependent, interdependent, and dependent. They just call it B1, B2, and B3 or BC. Okay. So thank you very much for that. And I also want to commend these two master's degree students that's here on the elective from Belgium. These two ladies' first language is actually Flemish, and what they are doing now is they're communicating in English, which is some of their third and fourth language. So for them to be able to do this with confidence in front of the cameras is excellent. So we would really give them a bit of a clap if there were enough people to make a noise. So thank you very much, you two ladies, and we hope your stay with us is very pleasant further. Okay, so I'm going to continue then with the rest of the slides, and my unit is Unit 2.3, which just quickly want to impress on you the importance of accountability, because accountability comes in all the questions answers, so you need to bring it in somewhere. And to explain accountability is more than the aspects of ability, responsibility, and authority. So just to explain that more than aspect to you, there's stages to accountability. So to get to accountability, you first must have the ability to do the work effectively by having the knowledge and the skills. Then you must be given or to take responsibility for the task. Then that has to be followed up by authority, because now people see that you are able, that you are responsible, and therefore they will give you the authority. And then lastly, you are accountable for the action taken. So once you take that action, you must be able to please explain in a court of law if something maybe went wrong, why you did exactly as you did. And what we need to then ask you is, can nurses comply to these stringent actions? If we look at the example I gave you about the student nurses that was having a fight in the streets because they were upset about how the university treated them, maybe they had some ability as first or second year students, maybe even a fourth year student mentioned in this news item, who was organizing the lot, had more ability than the others. The question was, have they had responsibility yet? And maybe for the nursing task, but not for acting professionally, it seems. And the authority, obviously, they didn't have the authority to behave like they would. And one would then be able to say that they're not near to being accountable for their actions in the community or accountable for even the nursing acts because they seem to have a bit of an impulse control action problem there. So conditions for personal accountability then is you would then be able to accept and demonstrate accountability and responsibility for your own professional judgment and actions. You would understand the parameters of your own role and competence. Like in South Africa, the 3 categories of nursing are explained as a registered nurse are responsible for, a professional registered nurse is responsible for comprehensive care, which includes many more actions than a staff nurse that would be responsible for basic care, or an assistant nurse that would be responsible for elementary nursing. So you must know as either of those categories where your parameters fall, what you may do or may not do. And the comprehensive nurse, the registered nurse must also know the other categories because usually they're in charge, and you often get that a registered nurse orders a staff nurse or assistant nurse to do duties which is outside their scope of practice because there's a lack of nurses. And then often when those nurses get into trouble because of that, then the professional nurse stands aside and said, we were short staff, or I told them how to do it and they didn't do it right. You cannot get rid of your accountability like that because you are also responsible for delegation and you will be held responsible with the person that made the mistake. Then personal accountability also means that you consult with another nurse practitioner when you realize that your expertise are lacking. And especially when you have specialists in your team, like nurse specialists that, say, deal with osteotomies, colostomies, and so forth. And also, maybe you work in a surgical unit and you need the advice of the ICU nurse. So you make use of their competence and also know that your scope of practice limits you to do their duties. You also consult with other healthcare professionals and relevant organizations when the need of the healthcare usually fall outside the scope of practice. And I'm thinking of a dietitian here where you would consult about a diet, or a physiotherapist if the patient needs that action, a pharmacist if you wanted to know about the action of the medication before you give it to make sure that you're giving the patient the right medication, and of course your doctor. So you need to really know your limits to practice within your scope of competence. That brings us to question 4 and how you would go about to answer it. And Kat actually dealt with a lot of the ethical principles when she answered her question. She talked about justice, autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence. So the ethical principles that I want you to have a look at when you answer your question is in Unit 3.1, and the definitions there are for autonomy, which means respect for others, which means also regarding privacy and confidentiality and asking consent for the intervention. So take your ethical principle, give it a definition similar to that, but make sure that you give it in your own words, because remember there's 300 students that's also going to use this definition. And if you want to decrease similarity, go and look at other definitions and say it in your own words. Otherwise you're going to have more than 30% similarity. And then refer to the scenario for the next mark that you want to have once you've defined it. So you say, in this scenario of Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi calling the nurses devils, not angels, is he mentions that people, the public, doesn't have a choice when they go to the day hospital or the public health facility. They are treated just as numbers, so they have got no say, which is not showing autonomy or respect for others. So you need to be able to apply it for me to get the mark, because I want you to understand what autonomy is in real life, so that when you meet with this in the hospital setup or in your healthcare setup, you will recognize this is a breach of autonomy. I need to do something about it, and I need to verbalize it. So if you don't know the words, the terminology, you can't. So beneficence then is doing good and active promotion of goodness, kindness, charity, and to choose the best option of care under circumstances. And I just wanted to also remind you about the Life Isidimeni situation, where the best choice was not chosen for those patients, and because the provincial administration at that stage wanted to save money, so they decided to discharge them from Life Isidimeni, and they went into homes where they were neglected severely. So if you are upset about Dr. Aaron Motsoleri's statement, remind yourself of these cases and be honest and say it does happen in nursing, unfortunately. And then make sure that you then refer to the beneficence. Like, for instance, he says in that piece that that was posted by him, he says that there are nurses that are very good, but nurses aren't all of them like that. So you can say that there are nurses that practice beneficence, but in this case, they did not. Then we go to non-maleficence, which is the opposite of beneficence. It's actually doing harm, making sure that you don't do harm to the patient. So if you would be doing harm to the patient, you would be maleficent toward the patient. So you would not want to cause suffering and pain and offense to others and to deprive others of the goods of life. And this is actually what Kat also said. She could see aspects of non-maleficence in the scenario, which she then showed you out. Justice is to act fairly, equitably, and advocate on behalf of those vulnerable patients and populations. And justice, as Kat also said, applies here, because one couldn't say that people were treated fairly and time were appropriately given to them, because they were just treated as numbers and called in and had to go and sit at the pharmacy and wait. So they didn't really listen to them properly and hear their complaints. Veracity is to tell the truth, being honest, and to make sure that healthcare provision is to the best interest of the recipient. So I know, again, because of last year we had a similar question, and the previous year we just sort of scrambled the questions a little bit so it doesn't have a different take. And people get very angry when they read this piece about Dr. Aaron Motsoleri, and they start attacking him, and they say in their whole essay, they say, yeah, but it is because of the shortage of nurses that these poor people are like this, and why should nurses be maltreated? So they try to justify why this is happening. And I want you to look at veracity. Veracity is to tell the truth. You need to go look at the whole scenario. Life is a domain, and be truthful that this is happening in nursing today. And we need to be honest, and we need to address it. So the minister is not talking nonsense. It might be that the majority of nurses say 80% is fine, but remember there is that 2%, that 20% that's spoiling the whole issue for everyone. So be truthful in your application and reading of the question. Then fidelity. Fidelity means being faithful, acting with respect, protecting personal information. So if with Life Isidimeni, people were faithful to their patients, they would have realized what was happening, and then be an advocate for the patient and saying, no, this can't be happening. We need to deliver care. Or in the article where they were talking about the public health nurses, which were then devils or angels, there's nurses that are faithful, even though the circumstances are bad, even though there's a shortage of nurses, they still deliver their best, even though they're tired and they have to put up their feet at night, even though they're despondent, they're still faithful to being a nurse. And this is then where the highlights of a nursing profession comes in. They have chosen to be the nurse, the use of the therapeutic self. They have not given up and decided this is just a job, I'm earning money at the end of the month, so therefore I must bear it out. They have decided under any circumstances I will be there for my patient. Then altruism is the same sort of thing. It's unselfish regard for devotion to the welfare of others. And I often laughingly explain altruism this way. You know how nurses don't have time to go to the bathroom because they put their patient first. So they often go home with a very full bladder, bursting because they decided to help their patient before going to the bathroom. So that's what altruism is, unselfish regard for devotion to the welfare of others. And then caring is the act of nurturing by applying professional competencies and positive emotions. So being involved and realizing that this patient is suffering by just looking at his face, being able to read the pain on his face, put a hand on his shoulder and comfort him and say, can I bring you some painkillers? I see you're not feeling happy. Caring, that's what that is. So that brings us into question 5, which is about the nurse's obligations in caring for such a patient that was disruptive, that wanted to attack her on the way, versus the employer's obligations to the nurse. So the employer also has obligations in this scenario. And then also the rights and responsibilities of patients. Now often, or in Unit 2.5, you will get all the answers to what we're going to discuss now. But often we think, I just want to go back to the previous slide. Often we think that the patient has got responsibilities. The patient must be able to behave himself. He doesn't only have rights. But we forget that with the Constitution of South Africa and with the PANP principles and with the Patient's Rights Charter, there's an obligation on us, working for the public sector especially, but the private sector also follows this, because if the private sector didn't follow this, they would lose money, and they would be known as poor healthcare providers. So you need to then have a look at what the Constitution say about patients' rights. You need to, although you also have your own rights, but you need to have a look at the Batupele principles and the Patient's Rights Charter. So the Batupele principles talks about consultation. The patient can tell us what they want to know from us. They have the right to service standards, insist that our promises are kept. So that refers once again to fidelity and faithfulness. Access then, that one and all should get their fair share of good services. Don't accept insensitive treatment. You will get that also in the Patient's Rights Charter now when I talk about redress. Information, you're entitled to full particulars about the services that you are going to care so that you can make good choices. Openness and transparency, things that mustn't be done behind walls and behind doors. You must know exactly what treatment you're going to get. Redress then, as we said, when there's complaints, you must be able to spark positive action, and then you must get value for your money. And this is a bit of a problem in healthcare in South Africa today, because there's such a shortage of staff, shortage of budget, shortage to buy equipment, that they often don't get value for money. But value for money mustn't be the reason, or not being courteous to patients and not giving as much good care as you can must not be the cause where patients says that they have not received value for money. So then, according to the National Patients' Rights Charter, patients have got a healthy and safe environment, a right to a healthy and safe environment that will ensure their physical and mental health and well-being, take part in deciding on matters affecting one's health, get proper emergency care at a healthcare facility. They have the right to treatment and rehabilitation. They have got the special needs care rights, which is given to newborn infants, children, pregnant women, the aged, disabled persons, and people living with AIDS, chronic pain. And then they look at that one. They have the right to friendly healthcare providers. They need to have affordable and effective care for people in the final stages of their life. They need to get counseling without discrimination and bias and intimidation or violence on matters such as family planning or cancer treatment or HIV. They need to get health information in their language of choice, knowledge of health insurance, choose their own healthcare provider if possible, or the health facility. Be treated by a clearly identified healthcare provider, confidentiality and privacy to be maintained, so that brings in again veracity. So all information and costs involved must be told to them, and then they still have the right to refuse treatment and to be referred for a second opinion if they so wish. They have got the right to continuous care and to complain about the health services so that you can then redress it like with the patients with the Bartolomei principles. So when you answer this question, you need to consider also mentioning the Bartolomei principles and the National Patients' Rights Charter, because you can see it fits in very well here. I also found this information that USTA has, and it is in your guide as a very long list. And I was actually looking at the information about the nurse's obligation to the patient. There's 42 statements. When I realized, but you can actually pick out the interdependent, the dependent, and the independent functions from here. Like, for instance, if you have a look there at keeping the medical practitioner informed, that would be your interdependent function. Ensuring that the care situation is conducive to high quality care, that will be your independent one of your independent functions. There's being a role model, which is also an independent function. The next one is collaborating harmoniously with members of the health team. That's your interdependent function. And so for you to make sure that you understand the role functions, you can go through this and sort them out in 3 tables to make sure. I actually thought that was a very nice question to ask in the exams. And then I thought maybe rather for revision, because that would be giving you the answers you just have to pick. That's a little bit too easy. But please use this for revision. So then we get to the nurse as an employee's obligation. Okay. Nurse as employee's obligation to the employer. And over here, the employee commits to being loyal and complies with the values, work ethics, vision, and mission of the organization. And so often we get people that stand and chat outside and is cross, and they don't agree with what their bosses are doing, and they're loudly declaring it so that the patients even hear that. So that is actually not fulfilling your obligation to the employer. Then also the laws and the regulations of their country and the regulating body. So here we come back again to the dependent function being fulfilled. Then good value delivered for salary paid and assurance that the employer's contracts with the patients are met, as well as that the good reputation of the organization is kept. And so often we talk poorly about our organization because we cross with the situation. But remember, we, as the highlights of the nursing philosophy said, we have got a choice. We don't have to work at this institution if it makes you so unhappy. You need to then change jobs. You need to change career fields if necessary. Or maybe take early retirement. Or consider working part-time so that you are more fulfilled. It's not always your health facility, your job that is creating the issues. It could also be your work and home situation. Then the organization's equipment and supplies are handled with due care. I have had some contact with nurses in this job that I have where they come and see me and then they empty their pocket to remove a pen out of their pocket, and there falls suturing material out of their pockets. This is not looking at equipment and supplies with due care. You don't go home with that stuff. Even if it was made by mistake, you forgot to take it out, because you're not going to be able to use that material again because it's been at home. The patient is now prone to infections because of something that comes from home. So she also cooperates with the doctors and the other members of the health team. That's your interdependent function again. She assumes duty on the day and hour agreed upon. If she wants to leave, she needs to give good notice of termination of services. She must also give a full day's work for a full day's pay. And how often do we slip off at 2 o'clock quickly because we think our day has been very full, so somebody else is there to relieve us instead of waiting till 4 o'clock to go off duty properly. The nurse as employee's obligation to the employer also includes being a role model because of her knowledge, her skills, and her personal bearing, neatness, empathy, sympathy, willingness. So there comes your independent function again. And then assist and work in a team. I have often worked in a team where people are so cross with each other that they're not talking to each other. So how can people then give good patient care? Ascot also then questioned in her presentation. You have got a responsibility to work with your team towards synergy. Synergy means 2 plus 2 makes 5. So you're such a good team that you almost make up for another member. You are as good as 5 members of a team. And then the last obligation listed here is the nurse commits to lifelong learning to stay professionally competent, keep himself or herself informed of policy standards and methods of functioning of the employer. So this CPD process, continuous professional development, is very important, and you need to earn your points, and we will talk about that in the second semester. Then we get the employer's obligations to the nurse. The employer must make it possible for the nurse to ensure safe, ethical, and legal standards of practice. The employer provides her with a job description and orientation program for the nurse to know what her responsibilities, standards, and policies are. And he should enable her to advance professionally by providing ongoing continuing education and opportunities for promotion, and he should deal with her justly with regards to working conditions, problems, duties, pay, vacation time, etc. Now this is also important to mention in your whole essay, because you need to mention that if this person maybe has such a lot of post-traumatic stress because of this situation that she cannot deal with the patient, that she then needs to make use of the team that she works with, or that she can be able to report it to her employer, who then can maybe employ the employee assistant program people to deal with this post-traumatic stress. So the employee is not without rights. She must just know about the rights and use it. So my last slide then is about other important information, which is that the last 2 broadcasts are the 14th of March and 11th of April. With the first 2 broadcasts, we focused on helping you to answer the assignment in your own words. Remember the similarities. The last 2 broadcasts, we will focus on the rest of the guide. So we will have to work quick there. And then remember, the assignments are to be in on the 11th of March, no extension. Those that then obtain marks below 50% will get their feedback probably around about the 11th of April, or be just after that, and you will have to rectify your mistakes because you don't have a second opportunity assignment to make up for bad marks. Your results should then be available as soon after the April broadcast as possible. It depends on how soon I can mark 300 assignments. And then the exams will be the 20th May, so you will know at least three weeks or so before the exam who is eligible for the exams. So with that then, the 3 of us say goodbye to you, and thank you very much for listening to us again. Your podcast will be available on Monday, I hope. Thank you very much. I'm just, answering 3 questions here. Somebody say for question 1, must we answer in a reflective manner and express personal feelings and opinion in the first person while incorporating information from the text? Yes, that would be nice, because it shows me what your opinion is after analyzing. Must we quote specifically from your text in the study guide, or can we use the original sources quoted in your text? It would be lovely if you do have the handbooks to quote the original sources, because then you can read about the situation in detail. And then in answering the questions, must we provide solutions? For example, in question 2, giving specific actions the nurse could take, which would be seen as a professional response. By all means, please give solutions if possible. And then the next person also asked, I don't know, it's just the L there. Okay then, thank you very much for your participation and your questions, and you're welcome to contact me on the email if there's any need more to clarify. Goodbye.